The over 40s guide to mobility. Now you don't have to be over 40 to do the exercises that I'm going to go through today. I just wanted to do something that's good for people that are slightly older, who sit down maybe most of the day, maybe they haven't exercised for a while, but they want to get into things like calisthenics, handstands, or just general movement, and they want to feel that they can push their body a little bit harder with their training, but they might not quite have the mobility yet. So I'm going to go through slightly easier variations of the main exercises that I use. Now I started my calisthenics journey back in 2013 when I was 37. I struggled to touch my toes. I couldn't sit in a straddle pancake, but I wanted to do things like press handstand, handstand push-ups, and just have a good mobility overhead for handstands and other exercises. So let's jump in with the first exercise. So basically we want to have better overhead mobility. So most people are a little bit stuck in their thoracic, in their upper back, and they're like this, and they would try and put their hands above their head. They can't put their hands above their head with good posture, and they end up looking like this. So what we want to do is just slowly open this up so we can put our hands above our head, have biceps by our ears eventually, and not be compensating through the rest of the body because you don't quite have that overhead mobility. So one of the best ways to do that is passive hanging. That's unrealistic for most people to do that consistently. So I'm going to give other options, but if you can hang, jump up, hang for at least 60 seconds, or if you can't get 60 seconds, slowly build it to that. But you just want to passively hang, and it helps just open up all of that back. If we can't do that and we're at home, I would highly recommend you get yourself a foam roller. Hopefully it'll be in better condition than this one, but you can just see how much it's been used. And there are different variations. So we've got this higher one, we've got this shorter one, and then you get the denser, smaller ones as well. Any of them are good. It's just if you are particularly tight throughout the body, ideally start with a longer roller so we can lay on the floor long ways. So this is called a spinal drape or longitudinal spinal drape. So you're laying with your butt touching the roller, your upper back, your mid back, and your head. We want to turn our palms upwards, and we're just going to lay in this position and just relax as much as we can. Don't worry about what's happening in the low back. Obviously if you feel pain or something, we'd want to move from the position, but basically we just want to relax here as much as we can. Now most of you, especially if you're a bit stuck through that thoracic, you're going to be a little bit up in the air like this, and we want to try and relax as best we can now, and that might take a little bit of time. Now if you are going to do one exercise before bed and you're particularly tight, I'd recommend you do this one. It's really good just to open it up and helping the body relax, takes you out of that strong fetal position where all your anterior muscles are locked on, so just relaxing in that position. Now once we've done that for a while, or if you've only got the shorter roller, we're just going to replace that now here and put it onto the upper back. Now this one is a little bit more aggressive, so just be careful with it. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to start at the bottom rib and I'm going to extend as much as I can. Now I'm trying not to compensate in the low back. If you're particularly tight in the upper back but loose in the low back, you'll tend to arch your low back. So just be careful that doesn't happen. Go into as much extension as you can until your voice goes funny, and then come back up again. We can do a few repetitions there, and then we're just going to slowly move down so the roller becomes higher up on our back and make our way up the ribs. If you find an area that's tighter, just spend more time there, do more repetitions. And then once you get to the top and it doesn't feel like it's doing much, we're just going to roll over that area. So just where the ribs are. Harder variations, you could take the arms above your head. Okay, next we're going to look at our hamstrings. Now a good way of assessing your hamstrings is just to see with your knees locked backwards, so straight legs, bend at the hip with a flat back and see how low you can go. So the goal with this one, or a good assessment, is to see whether you can get all the way to 90 degrees or beyond with a flat back. What most of you will find is as you lean forwards, your hamstring's a little bit tight and it's going to round our backs. So what we want to do is find a way of stretching through the hamstrings where we're not compensating in the low back or rounding the spine to get down into position. So the best way of doing that is targeting each leg individually first. So if you are very tight in the hamstring, then we can stick something over our foot like a towel, or I'm using this band, and then all I'm going to do is keeping my spine flat on the floor, so it tells me that I'm not compensating, and then I'm just going to straighten the leg in that position. So I'm locking the knee backwards, I'm making sure my spine stays straight, I'm not rounding up through the back, and I'm not lifting the butt off the floor as I do this. The other leg stays straight as well, and then all I'm going to do is start to bring the foot back towards me, with the goal of bringing this to 90 degrees with no compensation through the spine. Now just holding this position is probably going to be quite tight. You're going to feel lots of tension in the calf muscle and the hamstring, and it's just hanging there With the stretches today, I'm recommending that you hang for around 60 seconds in each position. If you have longer, do longer. But remember, we want to do this consistently as opposed to doing a 5-hour session and then not doing it again for a month. So if you got 30 seconds, do 30 seconds on each side. And then swapping over obviously and doing the other side. Now there will be quite a difference between left and right for most people. And then swapping over obviously and doing the other side. Now there will be quite a difference between left and right for most people, but it's good to assess by videoing yourself from the side. Now if that one's not too bad, a harder variation is to do this lunge version. So I'm going to go into this position. So I'm keeping the hip on top of the back knee. I've locked out the front knee and I'm just going to see if I can get my fingertips to the floor. Now you'll notice I'll start to round my back if I'm too tight in this position. So we want to try and lengthen the spine as best we can, but this one is not going to keep the back as flat as the one we've done before. So locking the knees backwards, fingertips to the floor is the first goal. If you are at the level where you can't get your fingertips to the floor, I'll maybe stick with the other one to start with until you get to the point where fingertips can go to the floor without the knee bending. Then go to palms, and if palms feels okay, you can slowly walk the hands forwards. So a good goal is to get to the foot. And then once you get to the foot, see if you can interlace your fingers around the foot. Once you get to this level, you're ready to move on to some harder progressions. Next, we're going to work the hips a little bit more and I'm going to go into a pigeon stretch. Now the pigeon stretch on the floor is actually quite uncomfortable for most people to get into. So what we're going to do is we'll do an elevated version. Now you can use a chair for this one. An easy way to get into it, especially if you are a bit tight, is sit in the chair and then we're just going to rotate to one direction. So I'm going to turn to my left, bring the foot into that position, and then I can drop the other foot off and down. And now I'm roughly at 90 degrees at the knee and 90 degrees at the hip. In that position, I'm just gonna see if I can lean forwards. And that might be enough for you to feel in that left butt cheek when you lean forwards. Again, just trying to keep the back flat. Now, if you don't feel that much here, we can wind it up a little bit more by changing the position again on the chair. But now I'm going to bring the foot into that position. But now we can fully go onto the chair with that leg we're stretching and dangle the other leg off in front in that position. And again, 90 degrees is the goal. Try and keep the hips square, flat back, and then lean forwards. Now this is going to be a little bit more aggressive and get into that glute a little bit harder. Now here we can either do time, so that 30 to 60 seconds, or we can move in and out of the position and wind it up for a little bit, come back out, wind it up again. But again, I would time for the 30 to 60 seconds, whether you're static or whether you're doing the repetitions. And then obviously swapping over, do the same thing on the other side. And remember, it's normal to have one side that is much tighter than the other. My right side is very tight compared to my left side. Okay, next we're going to go into the quads and hip flexors. So I'm just going to go into a lunge position. So back knee is going to be rested on a cushion or a mat, and then I'm just going to go 90 degrees at both knees. Now once we're into this lunge position and we have an open hip. So what I mean by an open hip is there's no crease. So this is a closed hip. So now I've got an angle and there's a crease in the hip there. We want to push the hip forwards. Now that might even give you a stretch there. If it doesn't, I can wind up a little bit more by going into a deeper lunge. So I'm going to take the front foot away from the knee and then I'm going to push forwards, keeping the back foot down and driving this hip down towards the floor. Now that will give you a good stretch in that hip flexor now, the front of the hip. Now, once you can get into a good position with this one, we can wind it up even more by elevating the back foot. That's going to wind the knee up because the muscle that crosses the knee also crosses the hip. So now I do exactly the same stretch, but I put the back foot up on a chair or a couch. This is actually called the couch stretch. And now I can wind it up. Now this is going to wind up that quad a lot more than it did previously with the back foot on the floor. And I can do the same progression. So I can just lean forwards a little bit and go into a strong posterior tilt. So a posterior and anterior tilt basically mean which way you're tipping the pelvis. So if you imagine your pelvis was a bucket of water, if I tip the water out the back, that's a posterior tilt. If I tip water out the front, that's an anterior tilt, putting an arch in the low back. With this stretch, we want to go into a posterior tilt. So turn the glutes and the abs on a little bit. And then if we can, wind it up by taking that front foot out and going deeper into the position. Now, if you can do it, I recommend that you go with the one with the foot up if you can, both for this position and for the deeper lunge position. But if that's too much, start with your foot on the floor. Now next is one of my favorite, especially if you want to get into handstands. So the inchworm with a squat. So basically with the inchworm, we want to start with our hands and feet on the floor in this position. I'm now going to lock my knees backwards. I'm going to walk the hands out to a push-up position. So once I get here, I'm going to lock the knees and I'm going to keep my palms pushed into the floor. I'm going to slowly walk as close as I can to my hands. So at some point here, this is going to get tight in the calves and hamstrings. Wherever that point is, just stop there for a few seconds and then walk the hands back out again. Now, if you have got long hamstrings, you can go all the way in that position. You've got a choice when you get to this position. I could just take my hands off the floor, pull my elbows down towards the floor, or we could progress to a different exercise like the Jefferson curl. Now we can make this one a little bit more spicy by going out to that position. Now I walk as close as I can with the straight legs. Once I reach that maximum position where I'm wound up the calves and hamstrings, I'll hold for a few seconds and then I'm going to pull down into my squat. So take my butt down towards the floor as close as I can, as upright as I can. And then you could elevate or make it even harder, progress to having the hands above your head, then place the hands back to the floor and then straighten the legs as best you can and then walk out again for another rep of the inchworm. Now some of you might just need to separate that and not do the squat, but just do the hamstring inchworm position. And remember, this one is going to be a little bit more challenging than the single leg hamstring, and it's really going to wind up those calves. And then a nice way to finish is in the straddle pancake position. Now load up some cushions here, sit your butt on it. If you can't get into a comfortable position with this one and you look like this, even with cushions, you might need to raise the butt up really high. You could even do it on something this high, like the chair. You can have the knees a little bit more bent, but ideally you're going to progress to the point where you can have the knees locked backwards and you can sit with a flat back in this position. And then to wind it up, all we do is we lean forwards. So a good way is just to glue the hands to the floor. And then every few seconds, you just start to take the hands a little bit further with the goal of lengthening the spine as you lower. And then eventually you can get elbows to the floor, head to the floor, chest to the floor. And you just keep going in that direction. And then as you get more comfortable in that position, you can start to get rid of the cushions until eventually you don't need the cushions at all. And then you can get flatter and flatter towards the floor. Now as a rough guide, I recommend you doing that 3 or 4 times a week, but it obviously depends on your movement, how much you're training and your current level. You might also need to change the progressions and the regressions around or even swap out some of the exercises depending on whether you found them too easy or too hard. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below, or if you'd like an individualized program that I designed specifically for you, reach out via my website. So www.paultwyman.com.au. I offer different options in terms of online coaching, program design, Zoom sessions and things like that. Thanks guys, and I'll speak to you soon.